Snow White, the cursed mirror. In a distant time, surrounded by an endless forest where the sun's rays rarely touched the ground, there was a kingdom cloaked in peace. At the heart of this kingdom stood an old castle, its towers piercing the sky. The castle was said to be cursed, abandoned for generations after tragedy befell its owners. Locals spoke of it in whispers, warning their children never to stray too close. One fateful day, smoke rose from the castle's chimneys, signaling life for the first time in years. Rumors spread quickly. A young woman had arrived and claimed the castle as her own. She was called Snow White, a name that seemed to match her ethereal appearance. Skin pale as frost, hair black as night, and lips redder than the ripest apples. Her beauty was mesmerizing, yet unsettling. Her dark eyes carried a mysterious glint that seemed to pierce through anyone who dared meet her gaze. The villagers avoided the castle, yet they couldn't stop speaking of her. How had she come to own the castle? Where did she come from? Snow White offered no answers. When asked, she simply smiled and said, "The castle has always belonged to me. I've only come to claim what is mine." In the nights that followed her arrival, strange sounds began to echo from the castle. Faint laughter, haunting music, and blood-chilling screams that made even the bravest villagers bolt their doors. The castle, once silent and forgotten, had awakened. Snow White roamed the castle's halls alone, her footsteps echoing against the stone walls. She felt drawn to its secrets, as though the castle itself was calling to her. One evening, she discovered a locked room at the end of a long corridor. The door was secured with thick, rusted chains. Something about it compelled her, a deep pull she couldn't resist. With great effort, she broke the chains and pushed the door open. Inside, the air was heavy and cold, carrying the scent of decay. The room was empty, save for a massive black mirror standing in its center. Its frame was adorned with twisted carvings resembling gnarled roots, and its surface shimmered like dark water. When Snow White approached, she saw her reflection, but it was far from normal. Her face looked sharper, her smile more sinister, and behind her stood shadowy figures with hollow eyes. She gasped and stepped back, but a voice whispered from the mirror, "Do not be afraid. This is your truth." Snow White couldn't look away. The figures in the mirror began to move, clawing at its surface as if trying to escape. Terrified, she fled the room, slamming the door shut behind her. But the mirror was only the beginning. Over the following nights, Snow White was haunted by vivid dreams. In them, she saw people trapped within the mirror, their faces contorted in agony. They called her name, begging for release. Every morning she awoke drenched in sweat, but the visions lingered. Determined to banish the unease, Snow White decided to host a grand feast. Invitations were sent throughout the village, though few dared to accept. Those who did found the castle transformed into a place of wonder. Chandeliers glowed with golden light, and tables were piled high with decadent food and wine. Snow White welcomed her guests with an enchanting smile, her beauty even more striking under the flickering candlelight. Yet, something felt off. The servants who attended to the guests moved stiffly, their faces blank and lifeless. When one brave villager asked about them, Snow White tilted her head and replied, "They are loyal to me. Forever." As the night wore on, the guests grew uneasy. The air in the hall felt heavier, and a strange chill crept through the room. Shadows flickered unnaturally, moving even when the candles were still. Then, without warning, the lights dimmed, plunging the hall into darkness. When the flames returned, one of the guests was missing. Panic rippled through the remaining villagers. They searched the castle, calling the missing person's name, but found no trace of them. Snow White watched silently, her expression unreadable. The next day, a young man from the village named Lucas decided to investigate. He had always been curious, unafraid of the stories others whispered. When he entered the castle, he found it eerily quiet. The grand hall was empty, the tables from the feast still set as if frozen in time. As Lucas wandered deeper into the castle, he discovered paintings lining the walls. Each portrait depicted someone familiar, villagers who had vanished over the years. Their faces were frozen in fear, eyes wide with terror. At the end of the hall, Lucas found the black mirror. Its surface shimmered ominously, and when he looked into it, his blood ran cold. The missing guests stared back at him from the other side, their hands pressed against the glass. They were screaming, but no sound escaped. Before Lucas could react, Snow White appeared behind him. She moved silently, her presence as cold as the grave. "The mirror never lies," she said softly. "It shows the past, the present, and what is yet to come." Lucas demanded answers, but Snow White only smiled. He realized then what the villagers had feared. Snow White was no ordinary woman. She was something ancient, something cursed. The mirror was the source of her power, feeding her beauty and life by consuming the souls of those who crossed her path. Lucas tried to shatter the mirror, but Snow White raised a hand, and the shadows in the room sprang to life. They wrapped around him, dragging him toward the mirror's surface. He struggled, but it was no use. The last thing he saw was Snow White's cold, beautiful face as he was pulled into the darkness. By morning, the castle was silent again. The villagers never saw Lucas or the other guests again. They spoke of Snow White only in hushed tones, warning each other never to approach the cursed castle. Yet, on quiet nights, some swore they could hear faint whispers coming from the forest. "Save us. Free us from her." The castle still stands, shrouded in mist and legend, and the black mirror waits, its surface forever shimmering, holding the souls of those who dared to look too closely.